Welcome to Small State Diplomacy. This is another podcast from the chair, and I am your host, Dr. Digby James Wren, from a studio somewhere in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. East Asian asymmetry, the Sino-North Korean asymmetric alliance response-demand process, is not within the usual security-autonomy exchange formula. This is the lead article in Small State Diplomacy on Substack this week by Kim Jahee, who is a PhD candidate, and he's writing about the DPRK-China relationship, a formal security alliance established by the DPRK-China Friendship Treaty signed in 1961. It differs from the usual asymmetric security alliance. Most of all, China's diplomatic strategy dating back to Deng Xiaoping of avoiding direct confrontation with the United States and allow itself time to build up its national strength and to become a regional superpower has kept the North Korean nuclear issue from becoming a priority in Chinese foreign policy. In this vein, during the Cold War, China sought to stabilize the regional security environment more broadly through détente with the United States and improve diplomatic relations with South Korea to create a stable security environment in the region. Now, I'm just going to comment here to say that, yes, but the environment that the destabilization originally occurred directly after World War II with, the virtual annexation of Taiwan by the United States and, of course, the invasion of the Korean Peninsula by the United States to stop reunification. Now, in addition, China, which joined the NPT, non-proliferation treaty, after the successful nuclear test, rejected North Korea's demand for the transfer of nuclear technology, claiming to defend the non-proliferation regime as a responsible member. Echoes of the international community. So, as such, the Sino-North Korean asymmetric alliance, I just want to reiterate here, responsible member. It was originally related to trade, the World Trade Organization, Robert Zoellick, that China would become a responsible member. So, this is obviously projecting a kind of even though it's written by a Korean, it's still projecting a kind of Indo-Pacific kind of formulation for the perspective. Now, the argument here is that the Sino-North Korean asymmetric alliance is less likely than others to compel a response to each other's demands because the usual security-autonomy exchange formula has not been established. China's failure to provide security guarantees and North Korea's declining dependence on China have contributed to the diminishing value of each other, to each other. Look, this security autonomy exchange formula is in the first instance, there is no such thing as North and South Korea. There's the Korean Peninsula, and it's not unified. It's been partitioned. Now, China, the security guarantee from China is obviously absolute because there was a war to stop the American invasion, which didn't really work very well. And so that has been the balance, and now you see that North Korea is now a bloc in the Northeast Asia. So it blocks in effective trade, investment, circulation, economic circulation in the entirety of the northeast of Asia. So north of China, eastern Russia, Japan, Taiwan, China. So it blocks free trade through there. And that, of course, restrains the growth in the economies, including Japan's, of course. But the Japanese, of course, are living in fear that all of their sins from the past will be even more exposed, and their present economic situation doesn't compel them to try harder, which is unfortunate, really. All right, well, let's keep going. The situation is further complicated by North Korea's concerns and wariness about Chinese interference in its internal affairs. That's a nuance. The alliance treaty clearly outlines concerns about these two countries' interference in the internal affairs of the other, and North Korea has been vigilant in preventing the expansion of pro-China groups within its elites. Most importantly, North Korea has also conducted numerous nuclear... Now, he's mixed these two things here in this article. He's jumped from the possibility that North Korea doesn't want to have agents, Chinese agents of any kind, really? Or any other kind of agents? No, I mean, of course, every government wants to know which people from which country are which agents. This is common. Whether there may be some other kind of... yes, but at this point it's really just speculation. There's nothing in this article. It's not backed by any facts. It's just speculation. So unlike nuclear capabilities, starts talking about dismantling the country's nuclear weapons is a challenging task. Well, if you start that, yeah, it's a country and it has to be sort of... No, look, North Korea, it's a partition of the peninsula. The idea, if it has nuclear weapons, what are you going to do? So that's a standoff, and I don't think that's going to, it's accepted as a foregone conclusion. So unlike the previous six-party talks where all parties committed to the denuclearization of North Korea, Russia and China, they all expressed reservations about the application of tougher UN sanctions. Now, we all know that these sanctions are far more symbolic, although there is some teeth in them, but not really too much. Now, as North Korea's nuclear program advances, it is anticipated to take a pragmatic stance grounded in national security concerns rather than a normative approach, or that is like a normative Indo-Pacific US Washington approach. Is that what that means? American pie by the South Korean president in the White House. What's Biden going to sing in the Blue House? All right, so look, rather than negotiating a complete nuclear agreement, China will likely move toward negotiating step-by-step nuclear disarmament. Well, sure. South Korea should be aware of this possibility and actively encourage China to play a responsible role. The time to do so is now, apparently, says Kim Jahee. Well, as long as there are US troops and they're actively conducting games, and there's increase in missile deployments, naval deployments, air deployments, cyber deployments, submarine deployments, minilaterals, NATO, Indo-Pacific, etc., etc. I think Kim Jahee is going to have to reconsider her analysis. Now, there's another second article, Dilemmas of Deterrence. The United States' Smart New Strategy has 6 daunting trade-offs, by CSIS in Washington. Now, as the danger of war rises in the Western Pacific, well, why is the danger of war rising? I mean, that's the first question. Taiwan is an inalienable part of China. Everybody accepts that. There's only 193 members of the United Nations, of which 181 or something have already agreed to that status, including the United States and Australia and Japan and everybody else. So some little tiny micro-state islands, like 3 or 4 of them in the Pacific, Paraguay, and 1 or 2 countries in the Caribbean. Now, these are islands that were little colonies of Britain, the United States, or somewhere else. And they are bereft of any kind of defense, security policy independence, and that is true diplomatically, almost true diplomatically, but there are some exceptions. Nauru, Palau, Kiribati, etc., and that's that kind of struggle goes on, because the strange part about that, of course, is if you have zero recognition, which is virtually where we are now, you may as well just have, it's what is it, 2% or 1% or something. That's not recognition at all. So the idea that war is going to happen is based on the idea that there's a rejection of agreed international, multilateral, institutional agreement on the status, yet one power and its allies, rapidly diminishing economic and military powers, the G7, are struggling to maintain themselves with Gaza, Ukraine, Taiwan, Indo-Pacific, as their economies crash. They've cut themselves from inexpensive energy and they deindustrialize, and their economies have not switched to EVs, etc. And the manufacturing capacity can't produce weapons, and it also can't produce high-end chips, and it can't do the R&D necessary to get it up and running in a very short period of time. And we all know that China can. And Russia is now the world's premier military power, combined with China, the world's premier manufacturing, trade, innovation at speed and scale power. Well, I think multipolarity is going to have to do a lot of work to convince the Americans that the greatest benefit for the G7, Europe and the United States, North America, Australia and New Zealand, etc., is going to be to work within the multipolarity frameworks, and I think their economies will start improving very quickly. Now let's get into this second article about the trade-offs over this possible war. China's astonishing military modernization, shouts SCIS. Especially its arsenal of anti-access area denial, A2AD capabilities. Now this was all the rage in 2015, but it's true that China really does have this power, and so it's basically able to place an umbrella over its sovereign territory and over its periphery, its near waters. Now the idea that there's all these air defense zones, these are of course just imaginary lines drawn onto a screen to track aircraft movements. Now Taiwan's ADZ is basically 90% over the mainland. Well, maybe not 90, let's say 80. And so every time a PRC aircraft goes into the ADZ, it's usually right next to its own airport on the mainland, or at a very short flight, 90 kilometers to anywhere within Taiwan's coast. So clearly this is a false flag every time. Now let's go. Every strategy brings dilemma. Call it anti-access with American characteristics. Present 6 crucial trade-offs the Pentagon and the US civilian leaders must address. Many of these challenges, moreover, must be confronted in coordination with US allies and partners. But these conversations are not as advanced as they should be given the shrinking timeline and urgency of action. Strategy is the art of making hard choices, and the United States is only starting to reckon with the hard choices its new strategy involves. US strategy has been turned upside down by 2 key developments apparently. China's ballooning defense budget, which is at a fixed percentage of GDP, and it stays within that, and it's far less, of course, than any of the G7s. Far less than Americans, of course. Now, let's have a look. How is this being calculated? And its military technological breakthroughs. Well, using defense resources made available in decades of rapid economic growth, the People's Liberation Army has developed a vast arsenal of capabilities, especially long-range missiles, designed to prevent US forces from accessing bases along the Pacific First Island chain, as well as in the waters and airspace within them. According to the Pentagon's most recent public report on Chinese military power, for instance, Beijing now possesses roughly 1,000 medium-range ballistic missiles with a range of between 1,000 and 3,000 kilometers, and 500 intermediate-range ballistic missiles with a range of between 3,000 and 5,500 kilometers. If a war were to break out, the PLA could now target nearly all US forces within hundreds of miles of the Chinese coast. Well, my goodness, that's so surprising. Why would China want to be able to do such a thing? Protect its own periphery coastal areas, its coastline. So the initial argument, the contextual argument of why there's any problem at all relates to the fact that there's US forces within the sovereign coastline of China, currently, right now, including terrestrial military forces, training Taiwanese independence forces. Should I read the rest of the article? I mean, is it not clear enough? It goes on to say, of course, that Beijing can threaten US aircraft carriers many hundreds of kilometers from its coastline, and that it can monitor and track all of the surface ships and all their bases. It has fighters. It has perhaps the densest air defense network anywhere on the world, apparently. Now we can see the success of the Russian systems and the complete failure in Ukraine of the defense systems, air defense systems, and how the Russians have been able to overwhelm those completely. And then also we've seen that in Gaza, the Israeli Iron Dome has also not been so effective. I think this is tied up into military R&D, research, development, manufacturing, design, supply chains, interoperability, a lack of desire to invest into that, and somehow, or rather, the present deference of the Europeans to Washington's line on everything, is all rooted in some kind of apathy or anomie, social anomie in Europe and America, that allowed this situation to go forward with the political elite still burning with some kind of shining light on the hill kind of thoughts, and power hubris, unipolar hangover that continues with Biden in particular, and Trump. Well, I don't want to turn this into a Trump podcast, but look, enough to say that the military situation, the military balance, the trade balance, the economic balance, the diplomatic balance, and there's an interesting article from Lowy Institute in Australia about the diplomatic balance and how China now has global balance of influence in diplomacy, and that has enormous implications and repercussions for all of anywhere there's conflict or there's blocked supply chains and trade routes. And that's where China is going to concentrate all of its mediation efforts. And the key target, besides obviously the Ukraine, that's clear buffer transit state in the middle of Eurasia, and Gaza, Israel, which are also buffered transit states into Eastern Mediterranean, and the land route, and this is important, is through Iraq and Syria, where the last remaining US forces are, blocking that trade route. Now the Red Sea is now embraced by the BRICS Plus, and the United States is basically losing the dominance over the Red Sea. So here's the key: the Mediterranean remains within the European power, influence, if you like, control, but the Black Sea and the Red Sea are now sort of, that's gone, and Gulf of Hormuz probably as well, as Iran exercises greater influence because of the deal brokered by China between Iran and itself, between Saudi Arabia and itself, and of course the BRICS Plus, bringing Egypt and Ethiopia and all of the problems they've had with the Blue Nile Dam, water problems and so forth, and right between them, of course, is Sudan, South Sudan, and then we have Eritrea and Somalia, and those coastal waters there with piracy and so forth. So Yemen, of course, on the other side, and then the Gulf of Oman, the entrance into the Red Sea, so then into the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia being key here. So all of that is happening, and if you want to learn more about that, well, then I suggest you join me, your host, the chair, Dr. Digby James Wren, at a studio in Phnom Penh, somewhere in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. Thank you for joining us today.